Um, just just a quick reminder as we get going, remembering our 4 agreements of courageous conversation. So for the next 90 minutes as we're together, please stay engaged. Um, expect to experience discomfort. It's part of our mission with Courageous Conversations to ease people out of their comfort zones just a little bit. Speak your truth. Again, your values, your beliefs, your experiences, your background, your expectations. We want to hear from you. And expect and accept a lack of closure. In other words, these are ongoing issues, so we continue the conversation. This is our opportunity to contribute to that conversation and keep it moving forward towards resolution. So, but as we know with Courageous Conversations, there's always room for growth and always room for learning. This is a journey, not a destination. So with that, we're going to dive right in to our first clip. This is a clip from PBS NewsHour, and the title of this is like an hour-long special that PBS NewsHour did called "Raising the Future: The Childcare Crisis." We're going to watch about 10 minutes of a clip in midway through where this documentary hits, and then come back later, have some discussion about it, revisit this documentary in another section, and then we're going to move on to a second discussion around the emphasis on how it impacts Black women as well. So, any questions, concerns, issues? Everybody in the right room? Anybody think they're supposed to be in driver's ed class? All right, clip number 1.
Our childcare system in this country is broken. It does not work well for most people, most children, most families, and most childcare workers. It's a system that relies on a market to deliver what really is a public good. Childcare is something that makes our economy work. It supports families to go to work. It supports children's learning and development. We know that there are strong lifelong outcomes for children who participate in high-quality early care and education and child care services. But that just does not exist for most children and families in this country.
Well, Kimberly, daycares across the state are closing its doors because of the coronavirus.
Child care centers trying to cope with staff shortages are struggling to stay afloat.
Parents who want to go back to work are faced with a new problem, a child care shortage.
The pandemic has revealed a lot about the childcare system that perhaps people didn't see before. How fragile it is, how low paid the women doing this work are. But I'm not convinced that people really understand the disparities and pay gaps that exist in the childcare system.
More than 90% of childcare workers in the U.S. are women, and just under half are people of color. On average, they earn only $12 an hour. Most do not receive benefits, and about half are on public assistance.
The work has, from day one in this country, been devalued. The roots of this work are in slavery. You know, Black women were enslaved and expected to care for white children. When slavery ended, that expectation of Black women caring for white children and white families was continued. It was often one of the few jobs that Black women had access to. And over time, you know, we have seen as the system has grown and built out, that workforce and low-wage workforce has extended to other women who have had opportunities shut off for them across race and ethnicity in this country. And so it's been something that by design has been low-wage, devalued work.
My name is Olivia Pace. I'm a freelance writer, I'm an early childhood educator and community organizer. I'm 24 and I went to Portland State University for my undergrad. I've always loved working with younger kids, like since I was a kid.
When the pandemic hit, more than 350,000 childcare workers lost their jobs. Olivia Pace was just one of them. When she was first laid off as the lead teacher for 3 to 5-year-olds at a Portland childcare center, she worried about the future of her career and her income. She'd bonded with the kids she cared for, and she's kept in touch with some of them and their parents. But then, unemployment and COVID relief checks started coming in.
I went from making $500 a week as a teacher to $772 a week on unemployment, which is more money than I've pretty much ever made in my life. It kind of opened up this window of opportunity to me where I was like, oh, I can do whatever I want. I don't necessarily have to work a job that burns me out. Even though I love working with children, the structure of the field is such that if that's what you want to do, you're going to be worked to the bone, and I didn't want to do that anymore.
And there were other factors influencing her decision.
I didn't feel amazing being a Black woman who's broke, going in and teaching a mostly white classroom of kids whose parents are making more money than I've ever made, who have a kind of wealth and privilege that I haven't experienced, that I'm not experiencing, teaching their kids. If you're asking me to provide a service that like families are benefiting from, that is kind of fundamental to our economy, to our society, then I should be having more than my basic needs met. I should be able to, buy the foods that I like, buy the clothes that I like. I should be able to live in a place that feels comfortable for me.
Childcare is incredibly skilled work. They should not be worried about feeding their own families. I would invite anybody who thinks this is babysitting or unskilled work to spend a day in a childcare program. The McDonald's down the street from my house is paying people $15 an hour. Target just announced that they're going to be supporting college tuition for their workers. We can't compete with that in the childcare sector.
So if childcare workers are paid so little, why is childcare so expensive? Well, think of it this way. The younger the child, the more individual attention they need. You can't have one person watch over 20 or 30 infants or toddlers. There are even laws to prevent that. On top of paying those caregivers, there's rent, electricity, cleaning supplies, snacks for kids, monthly costs that all add up. Nationally, parents pay on average about $10,000 a year per child, but prices can vary widely depending on where you live and where you send your child. And some estimate that cost would be even more, between $30,000 to $37,000, if childcare workers were paid higher wages and had better benefits. And most parents can't afford that. So many childcare providers pay workers less and cut back on other expenses to make up for that gap. Others find extra revenue from government subsidies, grants, and donations.
That's the dilemma, is that the only thing that can fill that gap is public money. And we refuse to wrestle and acknowledge the fact that that's the only thing that's going to make a viable, sustainable, high-quality system is public money, because otherwise programs cut corners by slashing wages to the bone, not offering benefits, finding quality sort of workarounds. And I understand, because their other option is to close. And we have childcare deserts all over the place. Access is already an issue, and so they don't have any other option. In order to keep your budget in the black, you basically have to be at full enrollment all the time. You have to be charging enough money to cover your costs all the time, and you have to be collecting the money from your parents all the time. And if any of those things go down, the entire enterprise crumbles and you're in the red.
The dilemma over what to do about childcare has a long history.
There are 100 million of us, men and women of working and...
I'm going to stop my share there for a moment and just come back, and we'll come back to this clip and then come back to some other clips later, but just wanted to get people's initial reactions to the information. If people want to start the conversation, I think I can see everybody, so you can either put your hand up or just start talking, or if you want to put some information in the chat. Wayne, go right ahead.
It's extremely problematic. The capitalism or the free market capitalism is not the solution for delivery of public good. It crosses many disciplines. It's just not possible for it to meet the needs of people. It meets the needs of the people at the 1% or 10% level, but it certainly doesn't meet the needs of the majority of people in the country.
Thank you for that, Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that affordability and the affordability and availability are incredibly are major issues, especially the affordability issue. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Heidi. I'm with the YWCA, and as I was listening, everything resonated with me. The YWCA felt the pain. We have 10 childcare sites in Rock County at Janesville schools and Milton schools. We have a P4J site at the Y, and we hurt real bad during COVID. That was prior to me coming on board there, but I was working. You see Susan Neely on the call here. I was working at the Goodman Center before that, in similar environment, and I think everything that was said in that clip resonated with us. And the affordability, we are when it comes to summer care, 10 and a half, 11 hours a day, we are the most affordable right now, based on a study that we just did. It might not be everybody, but based on what we saw. And that's still $140, $150 a week. If you were struggling to make ends meet, $140, $150, for childcare each week is high per child, right? Goes down if you have more kids in a program, but that's a lot of money. When it comes to after school and before school, we're one of the least priced, but we're probably, we're with about three other, we're the least expensive in Janesville, but Beloit has a few programs that are less, in Edgerton, other areas of Rock County. But exactly what they said, if you raise any costs, we did have an increase in pay. We are paying our people more based on some government money that was given to different childcare organizations. But we couldn't have done that on our own. And, in order to pay staff more, it's exactly what they said. It's hard to finish in the black. It's very hard to finish in the black. It's very hard to do better than break even.
Thank you, Heidi, for that perspective from somebody who is a childcare provider. Anybody else? So just to add a little more local information on, just so people are aware, Rock County is actually considered a childcare desert right now. We have both an availability and affordability issue, a major issue in our county. And as was said, the only way to address those costs, quite often in terms of affordability, are to pass those costs on to families if you're going to pay more. We're a licensed childcare provider as well, and have that dilemma on a consistent basis. Even with subsidies, even with other resources, if we're actually going to get anywhere close to paying our staff living wage, that cost ultimately is passed on to our parents. And there's no other way really legitimately to sustain it, because grant funding and other funding is short term. So the only long-term solution is parents paying more for childcare.
Yeah, I feel like that's the problem we've been having at Goodman as well in Madison. A lot of the families we serve are on county shares, maybe some city assistance, but otherwise we're giving out our own scholarships to help parents pay for childcare. There is the childcare accounts money that is possibly not going to be there anymore. So if anyone wants to go to the Childcare Advocacy Day, that's on April 5th. Down by the Capitol, they're doing some breakfast and training people on how to advocate, and then going to the Capitol and speaking with legislators to try to keep that money coming to keep our childcare centers afloat. Because without that money, a lot of places aren't going to be able to survive.
Go right ahead.
I also am concerned that, that the childcare centers may be forced to hire people that just shouldn't be childcare workers. That's not their gift or their strength or their skill set. And so I think families will suffer from that as well.
Oh, Julie, that's a valuable point. I mean, it is the worker shortage will sometimes drive people to make decisions that they otherwise shouldn't. The other thing people need to know is that licensed childcare facilities have some very specific criteria in terms of who can and cannot work. So if you don't follow the criteria, you jeopardize your license. So it is, if you're a licensed childcare provider, you're not making, what you're doing is you're shutting down rules and shortening your availability, because if you do hire unlicensed or unqualified individuals, you threaten your whole operation. Go ahead, Thomas.
Well, I had to recall that when our daughter, who lives in Frankfurt, Germany, had her first child, she had an older woman that came in to help take care of our grandson in his early years. And the local government actually subsidized the payments. It was ridiculously cheap. You couldn't believe how little that the family actually had to pay, thanks to the Frankfurt city subsidies. But that was a very localized situation. And it was an individual, and I'm sure that there were some basic checks to make sure that there was not going to be an abusive situation, for instance. But these were not formal childcare providers in the sense that we talk about it in the organizations that have already spoken up today. But it worked, but it really worked.
Plus, she was also giving free entrance to the zoo and I think some of the museums.
Which also created more opportunities to keep kids stimulated.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, Heidi.
I think another thing with that advocacy day, child advocacy day, is that there's also another program called Partner Up. So Childcare Counts and Partner Up. Partner Up is a program where businesses help subsidize. So if parents or families put an X, then a business says, okay, I will support you on the match for that. And so we actually have some people in our program that are getting some subsidy from their employers based on this Partner Up program, which is funded through the state of Wisconsin. So, that's another neat area where we can get local businesses interested in helping people in our community.
If you want to learn more about that, that's actually a program that's being sponsored through the State Department of Children and Family. So hopefully to encourage that more public-private partnership and more engagement. So it's a really neat pilot that our state's entering into, as Department of Children and Family has a keen eye on the child care issue all over the state, but especially Rock County. So, and also in terms of the Advocacy Day, Susan put the information regarding the Advocacy Day in the chat. So if you're interested in being involved in that in some way, shape, or form, please check out the link that she put in. Thank you, Susan. Julie, go ahead. Do you have another comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering, are there any states that are doing it right or are getting a good program into place? Like, is Minnesota ahead of us, or, doing something, or are we all in the same boat?
I mean, there are some states, so for example, Oklahoma has blanket 4-year-old kindergarten in their school system. So there are some states who are looking at early learning and early literacy, but it's really the birth to two that's the major issue. There are states talking about doing even 3-year-old now. So the issue with those states taking on, or school districts taking on 4-year-old kindergarten, is that child care facilities lose money on children birth to 2 because of the ratios that we have to have for staffing. So if for example, when City of Beloit moved 4-year-olds into the school district and now the child care centers, it killed a bunch of child care centers in the City of Beloit. What City of Beloit also did, what school district didn't do, is they didn't also partner with private providers to do pre-kindergarten classes. That's the saving grace in Janesville, is not only does the school district provide pre-kindergarten, but our childcare centers are also able to tap into those resources and provide those P4J classes at our childcare facilities, which helps bring in additional revenue. So, but there are some states in terms of early learning that are doing it, but it's that trade-off between public and private. And I don't think anybody that I've read has found that balance. Susan or Heidi, if you know better than I do,
Yeah.
but just doing the studies, I don't know that anybody's found that balance well yet.
Well, I grew up in Hawaii, and Hawaii actually did subsidize childcare. I can't remember now; it's a long time ago. I would not be up to date, but I do remember when our kids were little. We got some. They kept state subsidized. I think they subsidized the actual childcare centers, so it kept costs down. And I think K through 5, once your child got into like school, after school care was inexpensive. You know, it was inexpensive, not like as expensive as it is here, but that's because it's expensive to live in Hawaii, right? So they try to keep costs down by subsidizing things like childcare. But that's a great question. Whoever asked that question, it makes me want to go do some research on what they're doing now and if they're doing anything innovative.
Are there any corporations that provide childcare services for their employees? I'm familiar with that in a very few instances when we were in Germany. In fact, there were some that had the childcare centers right next to the business.
So I'm not aware of any locally. I know there are a few of our larger companies in the area that are talking about either providing their own or contracting with current child care providers, but I'm not aware of anybody in the industry right now, at least locally. Heidi, do you know of anyone?
Correct me if, and Susan, you might know this too. I think the only places that I know that are offering free childcare or significantly discounted childcare are for like the employees of a childcare center, like the Y or like the Goodman Center. If you're staff and you work for us, we're going to give you, free childcare or significantly discounted childcare.
I am seeing that more and more, and I think some of the healthcare providers, I think maybe St. Mary's does. They have their own like daycare within St. Mary's. I want to say Epic, but I don't know about that for sure.
Yeah, but Susan, is Dean St. Mary's, they have to pay for that, right? It's paid, they have to pay.
Oh, the employees had to pay for it? Yeah.
Go ahead, Santo.
I was led to believe that Epic might provide childcare for their employees over there in Verona, and also Google out in Colorado. I think they provide childcare, but nobody here within Rock County that I know of. But going back to the video, I was really kind of touched by the fact that how that has a spiraling effect. If you can't afford to send your kid to childcare, that means you can't afford to work. And you might be paying someone $13 or $14 an hour, and you might be getting $15 an hour. So again, you can't afford to work. And the video kind of left me with the impression that they were talking about affluent white families that were sending their kids to childcare. But I'm really thinking it's non-affluent families of color that need to get back into the workforce who can't afford the childcare. So that was just kind of like my takeaway. Because we need to get more people in the workforce who can't afford childcare.
Yeah, the major issue is again the ability to pay people living wage employment in that field, especially with licensing requirements increasing on a consistent basis in terms of education and training for childcare staff. So figuring out how to balance that is a dilemma for childcare facilities, because again, if we're going to increase wages, that cost gets passed on to one place.
Yeah.
And as great as other grants are and other programming, as other things are, those subsidies are usually short-term and finite. The only way to sustain those programs is to pass that. The only legitimate way to sustain is passing the cost on, unless there's some kind of public-private intervention. The only legitimate way to sustain is passing the cost on to families.
Mm-hmm. And these kids are our most valuable resources, and we're trying to get the childcare at the least expensive dollar cost available. Doesn't make sense.
I think what happens too is that a gap that already exists continues to get wider, continues to get bigger. They say that in the state of Wisconsin, on average, families are paying between $10,000 and $13,000. less expensive to go to a state college for a year than it is to pay for childcare for a year. And I think they said that for people who are, poverty stricken or lower income, it's 40% of their income. And if you combine that with housing and transportation, how do they get by? One thing that's a vicious cycle is a working parent who has already taken a ton of time off, perhaps because their child have been sick with COVID or they've gotten COVID. They don't have any more sick days left for vacation days. So they are taking unpaid days of leave, which again, just adds to that, that inability to afford basic needs.
Yeah, so you couple the childcare issue with, we talk about all the other issues, affordable with housing and employment and transportation. It's a cocktail that's very dangerous for our families in terms of falling out of that mainstream space, falling into homelessness. It's a mental health issue. It's a physical health issue. It's an issue of belonging and acceptance. It's an issue of having a voice or not, or having a place at the table. All those things come into play when we talk about the lack of childcare. It does have a domino effect. If we can't get that under control, and then it's exacerbated by our housing issues and by our transportation issues, you have families who are completely falling off the grid. Any other comments? All right, I'm going to flip to our second clip. Our second video that has about a 10-minute clip that I'm going to show that more specifically kind of frames the conversation around Black women. But we'll continue the conversation in general about the childcare shortage. But this first few minutes was really interesting. It's a clip that Amy had shared with me. It's discussion of how childcare and lack of childcare, A, is a social justice issue, but B, is significantly impacting African American women or Black women. And screen. All right. Can everybody see the screen? Thumbs up. All right, good.
Good evening. Welcome to Black Mothers Matter, Childcare is Social Justice. My name is Sarah Idrisu, and I am the co-founder of March Like a Mother for Black Lives, and I'm also the executive director for Educators for Excellence. We're so glad you can join us, and so happy to say that we have over 400 people joining us tonight, and so I'm really excited for this amazing conversation.
And my name is Sarah Muncie. I'm the co-founder of Neighborhood Villages, along with Lauren Kennedy. We're all here tonight to center the voices and the experiences of Black mothers in America. The experience of becoming a parent should be one filled with joy. We should be able to trust our doctors to listen to us and support us through our pregnancy and childbirth. But Black women in America die of pregnancy-related causes at almost 3 times the rate of white women, even after accounting for income, education, and any other factor. So we're here tonight to say that the lives of Black mothers matter. And while about 76% of mothers and 96% of fathers with children under 6 work full-time in America, we're the only industrialized nation on this planet that leaves childcare up to parents to figure out on their own. We should be able to find affordable childcare where our babies and children are loved and deeply known so that we can work and support them. And we should be able to present ourselves in our places of work as our authentic selves without having to pretend that we don't have children. But that isn't the reality in America, especially for Black mothers. Parents are left to make impossible choices about their careers, often leaving the workforce for a few years because of the cost and availability of childcare. The effects of these choices last well beyond that day when your child enters kindergarten. A 27-year-old Black woman earning the median income in this country will lose more than $500,000 in lifetime earnings for leaving the workforce for 5 years. But with vouchers hard to qualify for, hard to keep, and increasingly more difficult to find, a provider who'll take them. In childcare deserts all over this nation, people are sometimes left with no choice. The time has come to fix our nation's childcare crisis because every parent in America has the right to parent joyfully and to provide their children with the life they've imagined. And until that is the case for Black mothers, the American dream will be just that, a dream. It's time to make good on the promise of this nation.
Thank you for that.
I'm going to pause that clip there. We're going to come back to it a couple more times, but I just, the first couple minutes of this with the data is what I want us to pick back up on, because she shared some information that I'm not sure that everybody is aware of. So I'm going to stop my share for a second and then we'll come back to it. But just initial reactions to some of the information that was just shared. Good, Wayne.
It's another example of the systemic racism in the country. It's baked in to just about every discipline. So it needs a national solution, and it is a social justice issue.
You actually, yeah, Wayne, I have to tend to agree with you that this has to, there are people who believe that we have to figure this out for ourselves, but I'm a person that thinks it's got to be public and private and get intervention and interaction. We have to have both entities involved. It can't be just a private sector issue for the private sector to solve on their own, because left to their own devices, we're not going to. And it can't just be the public sector on its own, because the resources aren't all completely there either. So how do we first acknowledge the issue in terms of systemic racism? Because that's still a debate and a discussion whether or not that exists in some areas. So there's layers to this. So first and foremost, how do we acknowledge and address systemic racism in general? How do we acknowledge the specificity as it comes to early learning and childcare? And then 3, how do we try to address and resolve these things? Any other reactions?
I think for me, just listening to them confirms, everything that we've been living through. Just myself personally too. I started as a preschool teacher. Sorry, my dog's barking. But had to leave work when I had my first baby because I would have lost money by working. I would have paid more for childcare than what I made as a childcare worker. And that just, the system's broken and there's someone that needs to step in to fix it. I think about the billions of dollars spent on, national defense that could go to something more sustainable, like childcare, education. And unless we all try to advocate and push, I don't know where that money is going to come from for people to get up onto their feet.
Thanks, Susan. All right, Julie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was surprised when they said if a Black woman is out of work for 5 years, has to take off, to be home with kids because it's too expensive, that it's $500,000. That's what it said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that just blew my mind.
Yeah, that loss of potential wage at $500,000.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It seemed like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a committee in Rock County that was pushing more. It was like an early childhood committee type thing. United Way was on it. I was going to meetings. I don't remember who all else, but I don't know, it just kind of fizzled. But the approach was going to be to get the businesses to get on board because of it being an economic issue, that the businesses won't be able to run efficiently if people don't have childcare. But I don't know, it just kind of fizzled.
Yeah, countywide, there are some there are lots of these conversations going on around childcare, lots of discussion around public-private partnerships and increasing capacity for existing childcare facilities and trying to encourage people who are interested in starting childcare facilities to do training and education, and even there's some potential money available, both at the state level and potentially at the county level to do so in terms of business development. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think in that circumstance, one sector of the community had decided that this was a major issue, but the other sectors of the community that needed to be involved weren't at the table or didn't identify it as an issue yet. I think that's changing now. I think you have people. I think you have both. You have nonprofits, the local government, and business community all identifying right now that childcare is an issue. So hopefully that's it. We end up with a different outcome than a few years ago. But I do remember what you're talking about, and it just kind of fizzled because not everybody who should have been at the table believed they needed to be. So.
The other thing that I think is interesting about Rock County is we just went to the school district trying to get space in the summer, and we can't have any space this summer. All the schools are being worked on. There's a ton of reasons why you can't be in a school right now. However, if you look at Dane County, they have, I don't know, almost every single school open in the summer for childcare, to run program of some sort. And I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, we started the conversation, and I think it was a good one. We put it out there that, can we have access to some of these sites in the summer so we can offer more care? Because parents don't stop working in the summer. And if they do stop working in the summer, that's huge. If they're doing that in the summer because they can't find care here in Rock County. So we just got a church. Our challenge has been, we have a P4J program that's licensed that runs the school year. We have 250 kids in the school district or more. And then when summer comes, those 250 kids still want care. We can only take 50 at Y. So we're like, what do we do? So we went to the school. We couldn't have any space this year, but they liked that we started the conversation. We went to our local church right down the road. They gave us a site. It takes up to 85. So we'll be able to expand and serve more kids. We've actually been seeing if we can take on another site, in Beloit. We can only probably do one at a time based on our staffing, but we'll start one new one this summer. But my dilemma was in 3s and 4s where we have a lot of need. We couldn't run 3s and 4s during the summer. We had to stop because we had to do K through 5 on site. And because of licensing guidelines, you can't put the two groups together because of the age and the age requirements. So you can only do, 3s. You can do 3s and 4s on site, but you have to be separate from the K through 5 program. That's kind of how it goes. So hopefully next year, we can find a way that we can keep our 3s and 4s going through the summer and continue to build upon K through 5 care for parents so they can work.
Yeah. And Heidi, but Santel, I'll get to you in a second because I know you had your hand up. I just wanted to reiterate what Heidi was talking about. I don't think people understand, or people don't pay as much attention to the need for childcare and the need for safe spaces for kids during the summer months. It is critically important that our youth, especially our youth who are challenged academically, socially, otherwise, have some safe place to go 12 months out of the year. The school plays that role during the academic year, but during the summer months, a lot of our kids are food insecure and have other issues because they don't have that safe place to be. So childcare and affordable summer programming is another major issue, and that is connected directly to this childcare issue during the rest of the time when parents are working. Most parents are still working in the summer, and sometimes kids are left to their own devices. Or what happens in a lot of communities, especially if there are older siblings in the household, that older sibling becomes the primary caregiver for their younger siblings, and then they don't have a summer or they can't work otherwise. So, go ahead, Santo.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, Jean. Oh, sorry, Jean. Go ahead.
Santo Jr. Yes, it just boggles my mind that the child care is not a major issue within our nation. And how do we do this? I mean, there are so many of us that care. Is there anything at the state level that brings people together? Are there any committees that do that actually listen? What is the best way to do that? I know I have felt very encouraged by the new editor, manager of the Gazette. And it seems like she is very open to focusing on issues of diversity. And I'm just wondering if that might be an area that we could help educate people as far as the reality of what's going on with childcare.
I think that would be a great platform. It is an issue that I think a lot of people aren't. If you're not directly impacted by the childcare issue, you're not aware of it. If you're not a parent or a grandparent or a caregiver who's taking care of a young child and making those weekly payments, it's not on your radar at all. But I think people need to understand again, the domino effect of children not having access to good quality early education and early learning, and how that impacts all of us, how it impacts parents, how it impacts our business community. If parents can't find affordable childcare in the community that they're living in, they're going to seek to live and work elsewhere where they can find childcare, which impacts our workforce, which then impacts our employers, because our employers have said over and over again, and we've been very fortunate in Rock County in the past few years that we've had a lot of industry move in. But if those families can't find affordable housing and affordable childcare, they lose their workers. So then we lose those industries because they move where those things are available to their workers. So
is this an issue we should bring to Forward Janesville, here in Janesville?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that something that the businesses could tackle and attract more families because of that, if the businesses had the childcare?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely, Jean. It's an issue that should be on our business community's radars, especially because it is going to start affecting their bottom line, because it's going to affect their production. If they can't produce because they don't have workers, then it affects their revenue.
Yeah.
Saw another hand up for a second. Did I miss somebody? We're going to continue for a couple minutes then with this clip, with this discussion that's happening with this summit. It was really interesting to watch and really intriguing. There's a lot of really good stuff. The whole clip's about 57 minutes long. We're only going to watch another few minutes and come back in the conversation. But I believe that the Courageous Conversations team are going to send the full clips out, the links to the clips out to people afterwards if they're interested, because there's some really great stuff in both of these videos that we have, and we're not going to be able to get to most of it. So, but I'm going to continue. I'm going to share my screen again.
Sarah. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we also mean Black families matter, Black maternal health matters, Black life matters in every stage of life. We're thrilled to be joined by an amazing panel. Dr. Michelle Sanchez is a principal of the Epiphany School and Epiphany Early Learning Center, a groundbreaking tuition-free private school open to economically disadvantaged families in Boston. Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett is a practicing primary care pediatrician at Boston Medical Center, a social epidemiologist, and the founding director of the Vital Village Community Engagement Network. Latoya Gale is the executive director of Boston School Finder and the co-founder of March Like a Mother for Black Lives with me, which seeks to leverage the collective transformative power of motherhood to eradicate systemic racism through grassroots advocacy. Our panel tonight will be moderated by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Representative Pressley serves the 7th Congressional District of Massachusetts, and she is also a proud bonus mom of 12-year-old Cora. Pressley's career has been marked by a relentless determination to advance a political agenda focused on women and girls and breaking cycles of poverty and violence while healing trauma and modeling joy as a necessary act of resistance. In 2009, when she became the first woman of color elected to the Boston City Council, she provided the intellectual diversity that the council desperately needed and codified and prioritized the needs and experiences of women, families, and communities through policy and participatory democracy. Her innovative and responsive policy priorities arrived through deep listening and partnership. When she was elected to Congress in 2018, she brought both the issues that she always championed in Boston and all of us to Washington. We're honored to have her here tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Congresswoman Pressley.
Thank you all so much. And before I get into some brief remarks, in order to authentically honor this moment and this incredible virtual table that we're creating this evening, I do just want to bring my own mother into this space. You know, I was raised in a single parented household. My father cycled in and out of the criminal legal system, many destabilizing factors in our household, including the fact that since my mother was caring for me alone, that she could not afford childcare and was often afraid to tell employers that she had a child because she felt that it would work against her. And so maybe from the age of 5, I was a latchkey kid, and we had a lot of rules about how I was to conduct and to carry myself, and to not tell people at school that that was the case because my mother feared that I would then be taken away from her. Just 2 quick stories. When my mother she'd been laid off. She was in her 50s, experiencing ageism and other barriers to gainful employment. And she asked me to take a look at her resume to give her some pointers and some tips. And when she gave me that resume, at the top of the resume, it said, Ayanna Presley's mother. And I said, Mom, that's your problem right there. This reads very eccentric. This is inappropriate. And you need to remove this from your resume. And she said, that stays. You can change anything else you want, but you are my proudest achievement. I offer that because that's the sort of soil that I've been rooted in, and am very blessed to be able to say that. The final story that I want to share with you before getting into my brief remarks is one that is another real life scenario that's occurred in the midst of this pandemic, early in it. And a Black woman, an essential worker, a single mom raising a daughter, again, mirroring my own family model, called me at 11 o'clock at night and said, I'm an essential worker. I don't feel well. I don't have anyone else to care for my child. The schools are closed. Representative Presley, you know, I don't want to go to work. I can't bring my child to work. I don't know if I'm sick and I have COVID. I don't want to make other people sick. If I don't report to work tomorrow, can you assure me that I will still have a job because I need to stay home with my child? That is unjust and unconscionable that would ever be the concern, that a parent would be forced to work ill and have no other recourse with which to care for their child. So now I'll get into more formal remarks, but I did just want to offer, and we'll hear more real life scenarios like that. So thank you to March Like a Mother and Neighborhood Villages for bringing us together in community tonight, holding critical space to center the voices of those on the front lines. Now let's be candid and honest about this. Black women have been at the front line of every economic and racial justice fight, ushering in new movements, and often we are hidden figures in those movements, but not tonight. Again, we've been leading not only movement in the street, but also in community building, family building, caretaking, work that has built a framework for true equity and liberation, one generation at a time. The collective care and mutual aid that I have seen throughout this pandemic has been fortifying, inspiring. In this moment, we must center the voices and leadership of Black women because while we have been clear, we have not always been heard. An activist friend of mine reminds me to not use the term voiceless because no one in our community is voiceless. What we are is unheard, which is why we must be intentional and intersectional in our approach. We know whose we are, we know who we are, and we know who we are accountable to. LaToya, to open up this conversation, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, I want to turn first to you. You and Sarah organized, Sarah Idrisu, a powerful show of solidarity on the steps of that church in Copley. Tell us what you heard from mothers on that day as they were dealing with a pandemic within a pandemic, both a public health crisis and a moment of national reckoning when it comes to racial justice.
Well, I think the biggest thing that we heard from mothers is thank you for centering us and our experiences. And the beautiful thing about it is it was a show of solidarity. We centered Black mothers, but we had all moms show up that day. And it was really a chance for us to normalize motherhood and to normalize Black motherhood and to control our own narrative. As you said before, people might describe us as voiceless, we are not voiceless. And we wanted to showcase that. And we also wanted to showcase that Black Lives Matter, not just if we are gunned down or killed, however we are in the streets, but our whole life matters. The whole trajectory of our life matters. And that's why we focused on some things that we're talking about here today: economic justice. We focused on Black maternal health. We focused on education. And then we, of course, focused on public safety. And it was beautiful to have Black women sharing their stories, sharing their experiences from all walks of life. We heard from mothers who had lost children to police violence. We heard from mothers who are working in this field and maternal health, who are starting maternal health centers here in Boston. People were shocked to hear that we don't have that here in Boston. And we heard about economic justice. And that's why we were really excited to join with Neighborhood Villages for this call tonight. Because when you think about economic justice, Black women have always been in the workforce. You described your mother, that describes my mother too. Black women have always been breadwinners. And when we have created, when society and the systems have been created that don't support Black women being able to have economic mobility by making it difficult and expensive to find childcare, to making it seem like you're lazy or it's out of the norm for you to say, hey, my child comes first. I need to take care of my child and I'll be back at work. And then thinking about when you look at data, when you look at statistics, if a woman who works is supported in that and she has quality childcare, she can concentrate on work. She can set her family up so that they can be productive members of society and be self-sufficient. And we have to change that narrative. And so I'm really excited. I'm super excited to be on the call with all of you guys. I fangirl over.
So we're going to stop our conversation there and talk about, or stop the video there and just talk about that narrative around, or the stereotype stigma that surrounds Black women in particular. Kind of in reaction to what this person was saying on the video. Kind of what's that historical stigma? Go ahead, Julie.
Well, I think it just ties in with, for many years, it was the welfare queens, women not working, just, taking advantage of welfare. I mean, it's that same type of stigma.
What else contributes to that?
Can you rephrase that question, Mark?
So what are some other factors or some other things that contribute to the ongoing stigma around Black women? What are some historical issues that contribute to the stigma that exists ongoing even in 2023? Like, how are Black women portrayed? How are they described?
So they're portrayed as angry, difficult to get along with, to work with.
Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, I'm always amazed that during the days of slavery, the white kids were loved and taken care of by Black slave women. And so it just amazes me that white people at that time would put their precious gifts, their children, into the hands of someone they were enslaving. And it seems like that whole stereotype has just continued throughout history. And what you say now, as far as the economic struggle, is just the continuation of that history.
So I value you, but I devalue you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need you, but I don't want to pay you.
Yeah. I mean, how can I trust you with my child and yet give you no privileges, no benefits, no nothing. I just struggle with that, Mark. The other thing that I really appreciated hearing from her when she talked about, no, we're not voiceless, but we're unheard. So, and I think we all can identify with that, feeling that we have ideas and thoughts that are valuable, but we're not listened to. And so throughout the generations, it's got to be extremely difficult to see this going on around you, speaking up, but knowing that nobody is really listening or caring, that there's not going to be a difference.
Yeah, so I'm being really careful because I'm trying not to mansplain stuff. But one of my favorite, one of the people that I admire most in the world was Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a civil rights activist from Mississippi, and there's a documentary on her life that was just another one. A documentary was on public television the other night talking about, talking about the fact how vocal she was, how loud she was, how prominent she was, but also how infrequently she was paid attention to or listened to, unless somebody else, usually male and sometimes white, often white, chimed in to back up what she had to say. And here was this person who was, a mother of four from Mississippi, who was as important to the civil rights movement as any human being ever could be to the civil rights movement. But just listening to the commentators and listening to her own voice talk about how diminished she was and how much she was treated like a second-class citizen in that movement, even though there's so many things that happened in that movement that would not have happened without her voice and without her presence and without her work. Go ahead, Rick.
So what occurs to me as far as where these notions might be continued and perpetuated is the fact that, speaking as a white guy, most of the white folks that I know, they live in white communities. They work at predominantly white workplaces. They go to predominantly white churches. They don't know any people who are unlike themselves personally, firsthand. They're not their neighbors, they're not their coworkers. What they experience of people unlike themselves is what they watch on TV, what they get through the media. And so if the media they're consuming perpetuates stereotypes, then that's what they know of other people. For what it's worth, that's what occurs to me of where some of this gets perpetuated, is because I think it was Martin Luther King said it's hard to hate someone up close, or something to that effect. Because white folks travel in mostly white bubbles, what they know of other people is what they get through the media, is my sense of things, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, Rick, thank you for raising that. It's incredibly valid. I mean, it is, we live in a time now where, based on the statistics, we're more segregated now than we've been in centuries, in decades. Well, a couple of centuries, actually, truthfully. You see this, you see that the majority of people aren't exposed to people from other races and ethnicities, that we choose to live and travel and work in and play in and live in spaces with people that look exactly like us. And rarely do we venture outside of those spaces. So it's spot on. And again, if all you're being fed is a certain viewpoint or perspective or lens, what else are you going to believe or what else are you going to see? So your point about television and media is valid. The challenge that I have is this. We all have the ability to learn more, better, other, and different, other than what the media feeds us. And that is a conscious choice. So if we know we're being limited by the information that we're being fed, we have options and opportunities to get our information elsewhere. We also have opportunities to engage with people from different backgrounds, even though if we so choose to, even though we may be uncomfortable doing it. And that's always the push. I think you're spot on with everything you said, but then how do we challenge people to step outside of their comfort zones and engage with people from diverse backgrounds? Go ahead, Gene or Santa, do you have more to?
No, I think what you said is so important. We need to get out of our safe zones, get out of our comfort zones, and truly get to know people who don't look like us and act like us and sound like us, and truly make friends, and then advocate for each other. Yeah.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Thanks.
Thank you, Santo.
I was thinking about, when we had our racial justice conference and there was the keynote speaker in the afternoon, I can't remember his name right now, I'm sorry. And he was talking about how to start chipping away at systemic racism, I think. And he was talking about how do you develop influential leaders of color in a community, right? Because if you are an influential leader in a community of color, then you will start to affect change because it's the influential leaders that affect change, right? And so he was talking about this, and it was really interesting. I was thinking, the things that I've been thinking about over the last year have been when you talk about being marginalized and you talk about, like, I was even thinking about intergenerational wealth, if a family grows up in poverty or there's been a cycle of debt, right, in a family, how do you get beyond that, right? How do you get beyond that if that's been your life? You don't have parents who leave you any kind of inheritance, it's they leave you debt, right? So you go through this cycle. How do we, in the area of whether it be childcare or education, start to open up those gates, right? So that anybody can get the schooling they need for those types of positions, or and part of that is having your kid in childcare, in an affordable childcare. Like, how do we, if we don't have enough teachers, if we don't have enough mental health professionals, how can we become a community when there are gaps like that of people that need to be filled? How can we open up in our higher learning educations the ability for everyone to get an education to be able to start to climb out of that hole, And I don't know. Sue Connolly has been very, she participated in a call around childcare and, with the governor and with some other individuals and had a panel. And I thought that was, I know she's a voice that's listening and hears what is going on and we can advocate too. But I'm just wondering about that pipeline that we help create for young people of color to be able to climb out of some of this systemic, cyclical debt that holds you down so that you can't become, look at mental health. You have to in mental health to be able to become an influential leader, have your master's. That's the way that mental health system is set up. You at least have to have your master's, I believe. You can get a job without a master's, but you're not going to make, 80,000 a year. You're not going to, you're going to make that lower income. And with the cost of everything going up, how do you get to that space where you can become that voice that influences a community? Same thing with childcare. How do we, with licensed childcare, tons of stipulations around licensed childcare about who you can hire. And how do we say, hey, we don't have enough teachers. Let's take away some of that, take this training instead, and we'll support and pay for that training so you can actually get through it. Like how we have this problem and we can probably fix it. But how do we, get people to, how do we get higher institutions to hear that?
Yeah, how do you raise that value, those values? And I think what are valuable questions. Wayne, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Wayne.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm with Justice Overcoming Borders, and we're showing the film Who We Are, a chronicle of racism in America. And one of the things that I've noted is that the Kerner report, they did a report at the end of Lyndon Johnson's administration that basically stated that we needed to fix this or we were going to end up in a hyper-partisan 50 years from then, hyper-partisan atmosphere with danger of losing our democracy. And that's where we're at now. They had a lot of the things in the Kerner report that needed to be addressed on economic justice, racial justice, criminal justice, all across the board, but we ignored it. We didn't do anything with it. 1917, 18, there was a number of protests. We ignored them. We didn't fix it. We continue to ignore the fact of systemic racism, and it's hurting all of us. We could lose the country over it.
Wayne, thank you very much for that. It is, I mean, it's true. There are a number of places in history that we can document where leadership had choices, and it seems like leadership landed on the wrong side of history every time.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's that push. It's the question becomes, you know, as we talk about childcare, as we talk about early learning and literacy, as we talk about systemic racism, it really comes down to us deciding what is it, who do we value and what do we value? And then are we going to actually start working towards those values and the people that we value and the things that we value? Or are we going to sit on our hands and wait for somebody else to do the work? Because over and over again, it seems like that ultimately ends up being the case. Do we really value do we really value childcare in this country and early learning and early literacy? Do we value education in general in this country? Is that really true? Then, I mean, because as we talk about education, we have to also talk about what we're paying our teachers at the primary and secondary level as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just our early childcare workers that when you look at wages, aren't the only people who are struggling. It's also educators in our primary and secondary schools as well. We're no longer attracting the best and the brightest to be educators. And not all of that is about finances, but some of it is about finances. Absolutely. Any other comments?
Yeah, what irritates me is that when we have a national disaster, whether there be a tornado, a hurricane, flooding, whatever it may be, our government manages to come up with millions of dollars to rescue people that need rescuing. But we have a nation that needs rescuing. We have people in this country that need rescuing, and we just watch them suffer, and we don't do anything about it. We just sit there and say, what can we do? What can we do? Why don't we appropriate some of those dollars that we create in emergencies to help bail this country out, to help bail the people out that need bailing out so they can get on their own 2 feet and take pride in themselves and move ahead. And it just frustrates me to no end that we come up with the dollars where we value it. And we obviously don't value childcare as a nation.
You know, it's twofold, Santo. I think it's having more resources, but I think it's also where we direct, as you stated, where we direct our existing resources. And how we direct our existing resources. Because sometimes the answer isn't more money, it's just better managing the resources that we have or making those resources available so we can solve the issues that we need to in the way that they need to be resolved.
Mm-hmm. And we find the money for what we value.
Well, and that's the truth.
That's
true in all circumstances. When we want something to happen, when we truly value something, we push to make it happen. So the question becomes, when it comes to education and it comes to childcare, how much do we really value it?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we can have conversations and meetings until we're blue in the face, but the movement, when we start to see movement, that's when it's relevant. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't start to see movement until it starts to hurt someone, until it starts to hurt people. It starts to hurt the right people, I guess, or until the right people have to pay attention. And I guess we haven't reached that critical mass yet where the right people have to start paying attention.
Sad. That's the truth. Absolutely.
So we have just about 10 minutes left in our conversation before discussion. I want to play a little bit more of this clip of these ladies in their seminar, and then we'll come back one last time to wrap up our discussion.
Over Dr. Sanchez and Dr.
I'm going to move ahead to that. There we go.
Point, you're underscoring that we are powerful, because when you are experiencing the impacts of a patriarchal society, of structural racism, the comorbidities of that structural racism, and intersectional oppression, it is easy to lose sight of the self-agency and determination and the power that you do in fact have. And I also just want to say I had a number of family, immediate and extended, that participated in the march. And thank you just for centering joy. I think that's also important, because our bonds as a community can't all be formed in traumatic events. And so we want to hold space for that as well. Sarah Idrisu, is there anything that you wanted to build upon?
Absolutely. Mothers are the best activists. And we're often left out of the equation because we have to care for our children. And so we are creating intentional space to show that activism and show that power, and not just when we're in tears, right? And every step of the way, you'll hear our voices. And so we've heard from mothers who appreciated that. And we can only imagine what that force will look like in order to create a more liberated and just system.
So Renee, from your work and your perspective of health equity, what does justice for Black mothers mean? America's healthcare system is another example of how racism is built into our country's foundational structures, deeply embedded. So how does your work with Vital Villages dismantle that? And from your perspective, what structural investment should we make in both healthcare and childcare to address equity issues in order to set Black families up to do more than to survive, but really to thrive?
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with everyone tonight, and I have so much to say about that question. But where I'll begin with is the media right now. We're all talking about safe return to school. How do we ensure physical safety of children as they return to school? Well, I'm a mother of 3, and many of us here in this community are mothers, godmothers, other mothers, aunties, to children who will be returning to school carrying so much with them, carrying the trauma that they've witnessed and experienced over the past few months, carrying emotional burdens that have been underappreciated, invisible, ignored within our society. And there's very little conversation about those burdens and about their safety, their emotional safety, their mental safety, and how this is impacting their life chances. So for me, equity and justice as a Black mother means reinscribing, rebuilding the social contract that is broken over and over on a daily basis with Black children in this society. It is wonderful that there is so much desire to ensure the safety of Black people in this society. Safety is not my goal as a mother. Safety is not my goal as a pediatrician, and safety is not my goal as a neighbor for anyone's child. Safety is a very low bar. My goal is fulfilling promise, potential, joy, and happiness. And we have to raise the bar on what we are fighting for children in this society and in this community. And so when I think about health equity, sometimes I think we just need to throw that term out and replace it with something that really taps into humanity. We need to replace it with dignity.
What does it mean to respect the dignity of Black mothers? What does it mean to respect the dignity and protect the dignity of Black children, Black men in our community? And LaToya kicked us off with the word love. We have to lean into a space that is way beyond this sense of emotional guilt into a sense of love for our community and embracing the differences within our community so that we can love each other. Because I don't think it's going to be strong enough for us to have a sense that we need to do something right or an emotional tugging. And so when I think about the work we do in Vital Village, we are really in a position of listening first and acknowledging and appreciating that members of the community have solutions, they have wisdom, they have ideas that have been, as you said, Representative Presley, unheard. It's not that they don't exist. It is not that they're waiting for charitable contributions and donations and ideas to come to them. They have been unheard. So our work is all around aligning, centering and aligning around that wisdom, supporting that capacity and building out opportunity structures that really respect the dignity of the human beings within those communities who have ideas, who have wisdom, and have probably a stronger desire than you and I can develop overnight to see their children thrive. And I'll just give one more simple example.
Please.
Boston Fed, back in 2015, looked at the household median net worth for Black families, right? 5 cities, Boston was the lowest. It was $8. $8 versus $247,500 for white families. So we can sit here and scratch our heads and develop case management programs and new clinical algorithms and models and new programs and services, or we can acknowledge that there was a systematic disenfranchisement called redlining that prevented home ownership and prevented access to a pathway of wealth that would be protective for health and well-being and thriving for families. So until we're ready to have that conversation, we're not talking about health equity. We are dreaming and thinking and acting way too small.
Yeah, so I so appreciate that point, and I appreciate Sarah Idrisu's point.
I'm going to stop my share there and stop the video there because I think, and I wanted to hopefully get. Well, I was hoping we get to this so we could end with that the clip of that preview of the discussion that was just had about about what we value, about safety, about well-being, and just that concept of safety being a really low bar. You know, when I watched this video the other day and that was said, it struck me. I sat for quite some time thinking about that it's in reality, in a society like ours, safety should be a very low bar, but that is where so many people are striving. The physical safety, emotional safety, that we're just striving to get to that basic space. So how can we, and just, it hit me when I was just sitting on my couch thinking, how can we get to these other places beyond when we can't even get to fulfilling that basic need? Like that we still have a challenge fulfilling that basic need, that too many of us walk through our spaces not physically and not emotionally safe. Like we still have to be concerned about that on a regular, consistent basis, let alone economic growth or education or continuing employment or anything else, that we're still battling this basic need in 2023 that so many of us just still don't feel safe.
Yeah, Mark, she was really speaking to my heart too when she was talking about that, wanting to raise the bar beyond safety. I don't know how to get there if we don't have the baseline. And just thinking about our childcare workers right now, and they're not even getting the baseline of where they need to make a living. period. So how do we get to a point where we have enough workers, quality workers, when we can't even meet that baseline? We were looking at the wage scale the other day at work, me and my colleague, and I think it said for a PhD in early childhood, they could expect to make $52,000 a year. That is very low for a PhD. So if that's where it is, if that's the wage scale, we'll be lucky to get teachers with the minimum to even walk through our doors. But even then, they're going to leave us to go work at Costco or work at Target, where they're going to get great benefits and get paid more.
And you know
Yeah.
what, Susan, something you just said that resonated with me is they make that, but how much did they spend to get that PhD? You know, how much did they have to spend to get that PhD? They'll be paying off that loan on top of that, which why would anybody do that nowadays? You know, why would anybody sign up to do that unless, you know, that's where they have to think about money every day.
Yeah, what are those baselines when it comes to stability and safety that we all need to come to some sort of consensus about, some sort of agreement about? Like, this is our this is our baseline, and we will not allow families or individuals to fall below whatever that baseline is. And that's where that conversation starts. Go ahead.
It's Marlene.
Hi, Marlene. Thank you.
I was just thinking of the Beloit High School basketball team that had that racism problem when they traveled outside of Beloit, and how the community is going to be handling that. And now on a Muskego, that's what it was. The Mosquito School District is handling it. But that's something that's happened in the last 3 weeks, I think it was ago. And it's something where the community really should come. I think the community has come together. The city council honored the basketball team this week or last week. So it's something that's happening right now with racism that we should keep on.
Yeah, what was wonderful about that situation is how our community came together to support those young people. What was horrible about that situation is how Muskego didn't. I think where we need to be paying attention is not how Beloit reacted to its own youth wrapping around, but how Muskego didn't.
Well,
That's where the issue lies.
Yeah. Did you see at BIFF, the Beloit International Film Festival, did you see the movie The Exchange?
No, I did not.
Well, that's one way to go. It was done now 53 years ago, where Rufus King High School and Kaukauna. They only exchanged 4 students, but they put on a play, which is actually very interesting to read. It probably would not be allowed in Florida, but it's all original documents taken from statements from Thomas Jefferson up to the present. And then they did it 50 years later, so about 3 years ago, they did an exchange again. And I think something like that ought to happen with Muskego and maybe other communities.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to something that we were talking about just earlier about the lack of engagement, the lack of contact with people who are different from you. And how do you create?
When we first moved back to Beloit, I remember I don't remember who it was, telling me that their son or daughter went to college in Stevens Point or something like that. And in that class, the professor said, well, we don't have any Black students, but we have a person here from Beloit. She can tell us about living with Black people. And she was like, they're people. There's nothing I really have to say.
Unfortunately, based on my college experience in the UW system, that does not surprise me at all.
It would be an interesting social and economical experiment to replace all of our childcare workers with white men and see if people start listening then. Because like right now, the people that are in it, their heart is in it, they're staying in the field for like decades and getting paid hardly nothing. They are gems. They are gems for being in it, but they're also being exploited. It's exploitation.
Absolutely.
But like, what if we replace them with white men and see what happens? When people start listening, when people start increasing the wage scales.
Thank you, Susan, for that. And on that note, we have reached our 7 o'clock hour. There are a couple of announcements. I want to make sure we get a quick announcements in before we close. First of all, second showing of the part 2 of Who We Are, a chronicle of racism in America, is being shown on Thursday, April 13th at the Beloit Public Library from 6 to 8:30. And then there'll be a small group discussion to follow. Also want to make sure I announce, so excited every year about this. The Stand Against Racism is coming up. Thanks to the YW for doing this every single year. It's so amazing. So the Beloit stand is going to happen here, Thursday, April 27th from 12 to 1:30 at the Harry Moore Pavilion at Riverside Park. And in Janesville, Thursday, April 20th at the Lower Courthouse Amphitheater from 12 to 1:30. Are there any other announcements from the group that people would like to make?
Yeah, I think I'd like to give a heads up. The Diversity Action Team of Rock County will be commemorating its 25th anniversary on May 11th at its annual meeting, which will be held at Community Health in Beloit. And I will get an email out to all of you who are on our mailing list, friends and members of the Diversity Action Team of Rock County. And that will be May 11th at 5:30. And look for that email after next week, after our board meeting.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, if there are none other, I want to thank you all for allowing me to guest host this evening.